I was standing in a freezing cemetery in Ohio, watching my mother's casket being lowered into the ground when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it. I was trying to hold my sister up. She was shaking so hard I thought her knees were going to give out, and I was trying to process the fact that the woman who raised us as a single mom on a waitress's salary was actually gone. My phone vibrated again, then the third time. I thought maybe it was the caterer for the reception or someone lost on their way to the burial site. I pulled my phone out of my overcoat, squinting through the rain. It wasn't the caterer. It was an email from my boss, David. The subject line read, "Immediate termination of employment." I stared at the screen. The rain hit the glass, distorting the words, but the message was clear. I had been fired for being at my mother's funeral. Let me back up, because to understand how a human being could be this profoundly soulless, you need to understand the culture of the company I was working for, and specifically, you need to understand David. I'm 28. For the last 3 years, I've worked as an account manager at a mid-sized logistics and freight brokerage in downtown Chicago. If you don't know anything about freight logistics, it is a high-stress, high-turnover industry. You are constantly dealing with delayed trucks, missing shipments, angry warehouse managers, and clients who expect their goods to be moved across the country for pennies. I was making $72,000 a year, which was decent money for me, but the expectations were borderline inhumane. My immediate supervisor was a guy named David. David was 42, drove a leased BMW he complained about the payments on, and lived for hustle culture. He was the kind of guy who unironically used phrases like, "We're a family here," while simultaneously denying people time off for their kids' doctor appointments. He was obsessed with utilization rates, daily metrics, and face time in the office. But David's biggest flaw wasn't just that he was a micromanager. It was that he was incompetent. He had been promoted to regional director of accounts because he was a smooth talker, but he had absolutely no idea how to actually run the back-end logistics software we used, and he was terrible at client retention. He relied entirely on his team, mostly me and a girl named Chloe, to keep his most important accounts from churning. The biggest account we had was called the Miller Group. They represented about 30% of David's quarterly revenue targets, and we were right in the middle of renewing their annual contract when my life completely fell apart. It was a Tuesday night, right around 11:30 p.m. I was actually in bed, reading some emails on my phone, when my sister Sarah called. Sarah is 31 and lived about 20 minutes away from her mom in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. When I answered the phone, Sarah wasn't crying, she was just hyperventilating. "Mark," she gasped, "you need to come home. Right now. Mom had a stroke. It's bad. The paramedics are taking her to Cleveland Clinic." I didn't even pack a bag. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, my laptop out of habit, and I got in my car. The drive from Chicago to Cleveland takes about 5.5 hours. I did it in 4.5. I drove through the dead of night, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, just praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. I arrived at the hospital at 4,003 in the morning. My sister was sitting in the ICU waiting room looking like a ghost. The doctors came out and gave it to us straight. It was a massive hemorrhagic stroke. The bleeding in her brain was extensive. She was on a ventilator, but there was no brain activity. They told us it was just a matter of time. I sat in that sterile, brightly lit waiting room, completely hollowed out. At 8,000 a.m. on Wednesday, my phone chimed. It was a Slack message from David. "Hey Mark, noticed you aren't logged in yet. Need those Miller Group Q3 projections by 10 a.m. We have the sync with their VP this afternoon." I took a shaky breath, opened my email app, and typed out a message to David and the HR department. Subject: Emergency leave of absence. "Hi David and HR. I am writing to inform you that I will be out of the office for the foreseeable future. My mother suffered a massive stroke last night and is currently on life support. I am at the hospital with my family in Ohio. I will keep you updated, but I will not be online or available for work today. According to our company handbook, employees are entitled to up to 5 days of paid bereavement leave for the death of an immediate family member, plus the use of any accrued PTO for family emergencies. I had 14 days of unused PTO. I figured I was covered. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was David. I stepped out of the ICU waiting room and walked down the hallway to take it. "Hello? Mark, buddy?" David's voice came through the speaker. He used his sympathetic tone, which sounded about as genuine as a $3 bill. "Hey man, I just saw your email. I am so sorry to hear about your mom." "That is just awful. Sending thoughts and prayers to you and your sister." "Thanks, David. I appreciate it," I said, my voice cracking. "Listen, man," he continued, not missing a beat. "I hate to even bring this up right now, but the Miller Group sync is at 2 p.m. I know you've got a lot going on, but do you think you could just hop on your laptop for like an hour? Just to walk me through the Q3 spreadsheet? I can't find the raw data." I closed my eyes. "David, my mother is hooked up to a machine breathing for her. Her brain is bleeding. I am not opening my laptop." There was a long pause. Right, totally understand. Family first. But, you'll be back online tomorrow, right? Assuming things stabilize? David, no. I'm taking emergency family leave. I'll reach out when I know more. I hung up on him before he could respond. On Thursday morning at 6:30 a.m., my mother passed away. The next few days were a blur of absolute agony. If you've never had to plan a funeral for a parent, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. You are entirely shattered, completely drained of all emotional energy, and yet you are forced to make 100 logistical and financial decisions. Which casket? What flowers? What is the obituary going to say? How are we paying for this? On Friday afternoon, I sent another official email to David in HR. I informed them that my mother had passed away. I officially requested my 5 days of bereavement leave, starting that day, Friday, and carrying through the following Thursday. The funeral was scheduled for Tuesday. HR replied within an hour, "Mark, we are so incredibly sorry for your loss. Please take all the time you need. Your bereavement leave is approved through Thursday. Let us know if you need to dip into your PTO after that." I felt a tiny sliver of relief. The company was backing me up, but then, at 4:30 p.m. on Friday, my phone rang again. It was David. "Hey Mark," he said. His voice was clipped, tight, no fake sympathy this time. "Got your email about the bereavement?" "Yeah," I said quietly, sitting at my mom's kitchen table looking at a stack of old photo albums. "So, here's the thing," David said. "I talked to the Miller Group today. They're not happy. The Q3 projections I showed them were a mess, because you weren't here to explain them. David, the raw data is in the shared drive, folder labeled Q3 Raw. I've told you this." "Yeah, well, it's complicated," he snapped. "Look, they want another meeting on Monday, a big one. The CEO of Miller is joining. If we don't nail this, they're pulling their contract. I need you on that call on Monday at 9 a.m. I gripped the phone tightly. "David, I just told you, my mom's funeral is on Tuesday. I am in Ohio. I am on approved bereavement leave." "Bereavement is for the funeral," David argued. "Can't you just do the funeral on the weekend? People do Saturday funerals all the time. Just have it tomorrow, and then drive back Sunday so you're online Monday." I honestly thought I was hallucinating. "Did you just ask me to reschedule my dead mother's funeral to accommodate your client meeting?" "I'm asking you to be a team player, Mark." David's voice rose. "This is $1 million account. You are the account manager. You can't just disappear for a week and leave me holding the bag. The company needs you." "HR approved my leave, David. I will not be online on Monday. I will be burying my mother." "If you aren't online on Monday at 9 a.m., David said, his voice dropping into a cold, threatening register, "I'm going to consider it job abandonment. We have a strict policy on unexcused absences during critical business periods." "It's not unexcused," I fired back. "It's approved bereavement. I am your manager. I decide what is critical. See you Monday, Mark." He hung up. I sat there, shaking with a mix of grief and absolute rage. I debated calling HR right then, but it was past 5 p.m. on a Friday. They were gone, and honestly, I didn't have the mental capacity to fight a corporate battle. I had to go write a eulogy. Monday morning came. I did not log on. I spent the day with my sister, greeting relatives who had flown in, going to the funeral home for the viewing. My phone blew up all morning. 9:05 a.m. "David, where are you? The pre-call is starting." 9:30 a.m. "David, Mark, this is your final warning." 10:15 a.m. "David, you are actively sabotaging this account." I muted his notifications. I couldn't deal with it. Then came Tuesday, the day of the funeral. It was a miserable, gray, rainy Ohio day. We had the service at a small church, and then we drove to the cemetery for the burial. That brings us back to the moment standing by the grave. My phone vibrated. Subject: immediate termination of employment. "Mark, despite my direct orders and the critical nature of the Miller Group account, you failed to report to work on Monday, resulting in a disastrous client meeting. Your refusal to prioritize your professional responsibilities constitutes gross insubordination and job abandonment. Effective immediately, your employment at Apex Logistics is terminated. We will mail your final paycheck and a box of your personal items to your address on file, David." I stood there in the rain, reading those words while a priest read my mother's final rites. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. A strange, eerie calm washed over me. It was the kind of calm that only comes when you realize that playing by the rules is no longer an option, and the only path forward is scorched earth. After the funeral, I went back to my sister's house. I sat on her couch, opened my personal laptop, and stared at the wall. Here is what David didn't know. David thought I was just a mid-level grunt who would quietly accept being bullied. He also thought he was a lot smarter than he actually was. You see, David had a habit of cutting corners. Over the last year, I had noticed severe discrepancies in how David handled the Miller Group account. Logistics is highly regulated. When a client agrees to a certain shipping rate, they have to sign off on a specific addendum. David was routinely skipping the signature phase to expedite shipments and hit his monthly quotas, and then forging the digital signatures later using old PDFs. I knew this because I was the one who had to process the back-end paperwork. I had confronted him about it 6 months ago via email. I told him it was a massive liability. His response, in writing, was, "Don't worry about it, Mark. It's just a formality. I'll take full responsibility. Just get it through the system." Because I am not an idiot, and because I never trusted David, I had set up an auto-forwarding rule on my work email. Anytime David sent me an email containing keywords like override, approval, signature, or don't worry about it, a copy was secretly blind copied to a secure, encrypted personal email address I created specifically for this purpose. I had a digital vault of every single illegal, policy-breaking, fraudulent thing David had done for the last 3 years. Furthermore, I knew that David firing me was a rogue action. Managers at Apex could not unilaterally terminate employees without HR approval, an investigation, and a severance review. David had panicked because he bombed the Miller meeting, and he was trying to use my absence as a scapegoat to tell the CEO, "Hey, my account manager abandoned ship. I had to fire him. That's why the numbers are bad." He was trying to save his own skin by sacrificing mine. On Wednesday morning, instead of wallowing in misery, I called a guy named Greg. Greg was an old college buddy of mine who now worked as an employment attorney in Chicago. I explained the situation to him. I forwarded him the HR approval for my bereavement, David's texts demanding I reschedule the funeral, the termination email, and, most importantly, the file containing David's forged signatures. Greg called me back 20 minutes later. He sounded almost giddy. "Mark," Greg said, "they didn't just step in a pile of mess. They dove headfirst into a volcano. Not only is this a blatant violation of the Family and Medical Leave Act and their own corporate bereavement policy, but this documentation you have on the Miller account, that's corporate fraud. If the Miller Group finds out, they will sue Apex into oblivion." "I don't want to sue Apex," I said, my voice cold. "I want David's head on a spike." "Oh, we're going to get it," Greg said. "Drive back to Chicago. We have a meeting tomorrow, Thursday morning, 9:00 a.m. I walked into the Apex Logistics downtown office. The receptionist looked at me like she had seen a ghost. "Mark, I thought you were let go." "I'm here to see Sarah Jenkins," I said. Sarah Jenkins was the vice president of human resources. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Tell her Mark is here, and my lawyer Greg is on speakerphone. Tell her it's regarding David, the Miller Group, and FMLA violations." Within 3 minutes, I was sitting in the glass-walled conference room. Sarah Jenkins walked in, looking incredibly stressed. She was followed by Marcus, the chief operating officer of the entire company. "Mark," Sarah said, closing the door, "what is going on? We received David's termination notice for you on Tuesday. We were incredibly confused, given that I personally approved your bereavement leave." "I'm glad you're confused, Sarah," I said, placing my laptop on the table. I had Greg on speakerphone. "Sarah, Marcus," Greg's voice boomed from the phone. "My name is Greg Thomas. I represent Mark. As you are aware, firing an employee while on HR-approved bereavement leave for a parent's death is a catastrophic violation of employment law. But that is actually the least of your problems today." Marcus, the COO, frowned. "What do you mean?" I opened my laptop. I turned it around to face them. "David fired me because he botched the Miller Group meeting," I explained, my voice steady. "He botched the meeting because he doesn't know how to do his job. But worse than that, he has been committing corporate fraud for the last 12 months. I hit the spacebar, initiating a slideshow I had built on the drive back from Ohio. I showed them the emails. I showed them the forged digital signatures. I showed them David's explicit, written instructions to bypass legal compliance. Sarah Jenkins covered her mouth with her hand. Marcus, the COO, turned pale white. "If the Miller Group audits these shipments," I said calmly, "they will find out that Apex has been illegally processing their freight. David created this mess, and he fired me while I was burying my mother to cover it up." The room was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "What do you want, Mark?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "First," I said, "I want my termination immediately revoked and wiped from my record." "Done," Sarah said instantly. "Second, I want David gone, today, escorted out by security. No severance, no quiet resignation, fired for cause." Marcus looked at the screen, then at me. "If we do that, the Miller account is entirely unmanaged." "No, it's not," I said, "because I am the only one who actually knows how to run it." Which brings me to my third demand. I want a promotion to senior account director. I want David's salary. I want a $60,000 bonus for emotional distress and legal fees. And I want an ironclad guarantee of 4 weeks paid time off, starting today, so I can actually mourn my mother. Greg chimed in from the phone. Or, we walk out of here, I file a massive wrongful termination suit by noon, and I make an anonymous tip to the Miller Group's legal department regarding wire fraud. Marcus didn't even hesitate. We'll draft the new contract right now. I sat in that conference room for 2 hours while the legal team scrambled. Through the glass walls, I had a perfect view of the main sales floor. At 10:45 a.m., I watched Marcus and two burly security guards walk up to David's desk. David was in the middle of a phone call, laughing. I watched his face fall. I watched him stand up, arguing, his face turning red. I watched Marcus point firmly toward the elevator. David was not allowed to pack his desk. He was handed his coat, and he was marched through the office. As he passed the glass conference room, he locked eyes with me. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but the cold, hard satisfaction of justice. They signed my new contract at 11:30 a.m. I walked out of that building making double my previous salary, with a massive bonus hitting my account the next day. I took my 4 weeks off. I helped my sister clear out my mom's house. I cried a lot. I grieved the way I was supposed to. When I finally went back to work, the culture of the office had shifted. Without David breathing down everyone's necks, productivity actually went up. I stabilized the Miller account, cleaned up the forged paperwork, and secured their renewal. I only stayed at Apex for another year. Once I had the senior director title on my resume, I leveraged it into a massive role at a competing firm with a boss who actually treats human beings like human beings. I don't know what happened to David. I heard a rumor he's working in middle management at a failing used car dealership out in the suburbs, trying to force salesmen to meet impossible quotas. But honestly, I don't care. Some people think the corporate world is just about grinding and eating dirt until you make it. But sometimes, when they try to take away your basic humanity, like the right to bury the woman who gave you life, you have to stop taking the dirt and start digging a grave for their career instead.